So this is my 75 Apache Ramada, and as you can see there's something there that doesn't really belong, and I'm talking about the furnace. Now this is a Atwood 23,500 BTU furnace. I got it out of a 1995 camper that was wrecked, and you can find these furnaces pretty regularly on, say, Craigslist or eBay, because people do wreck these campers, and well, the parts are just fine. Now there's a few reasons to get a furnace like this if you have an older vintage camper, and one is the Btu rating. The Btu rating on this is really high. To compare to, say, a space heater, you'd probably need like 2 space heaters to compare to this, and when it's really cold out, it's nice to have some extra heat. The thing I've got against space heaters is not every campground has electricity, and to run 2 space heaters on a generator, you'd have to have a pretty good sized generator. And that's where this guy comes in. And for the price, it was pretty reasonable. I actually got it for free, so you really can't beat that. Now to run it, we had to run propane lines, of course. I ran a hard line. And another reason why you'd pick this over, say, like a wave heater or a Mr. Buddy heater is that this vents to the outside, whereas those other propane heaters with low temp catalysts don't. And believe it or not, for every pound of propane you burn, it puts off 1.6 pounds of water. So if you've got a Mr. Buddy heater or a wave heater inside, all that water is staying inside your camper, and you're going to end up with a lot of condensation. Whereas a furnace like this vents to the outside, and I think it's safer anyway. I've heard stories about people that died because they used a catalytic heater inside tents and campers, and the venting wasn't right. Say the tent flap got put down on accident, or there just wasn't enough venting, and they died. They lost their lives. So this is a little bit safer. We also used explosive gas detector on the inside, as well as a carbon monoxide detector, and I would definitely recommend that for anybody that's going to have a gas heater in their camper. Okay, the first thing to do before you install a furnace, especially a used one, is to make sure it works. So I've got my Atwood furnace here. I've got the power cable hooked to my red on the jumper box. I've got my yellow hooked to the case and to the ground of the jumper box, and the 2 blue wires for this one go to the thermostat. So I've got them hooked up as well. And I've just got a regular barbecue regulator on this tank, and I screwed it onto the furnace, and we'll see if it works. So I've got my propane turned on. I know the jumper pack's got fuel, and since it's hot out, we're going to crank the thermostat all the way to the on position to get it to turn on. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little plastic tab on the lever for the thermostat, and that little plastic tab goes beneath those 2 connections to totally disable the thermostat when it's all the way to the left. And that's fantastic because that also shuts off the fuel inside the furnace as well. This furnace is designed so it doesn't need a manual shut off because it's got an electrical one, and that's a good way to shut off the propane to the furnace right there, is just to slide it all the way over. So we're gonna slide it all the way to hot position and see if it fires up. There we go, we got a fan on. Now this furnace has safeties inside it to make sure it has propane and good airflow before it'll light. So we're waiting for the safety devices. Oh, there goes the igniter, and we've got flame. And I would say the fan's working. We've got flame. We've got warm air. The exhaust is coming out. I'd say it's good to go. So we're going to install this. So I got this used furnace. It's an Atwood 8335-3. And it's pretty compact. I'd call it like a cassette type. It just slides right in. And the first thing to installing this is to perfectly level the camper. Now I spent a lot of time making sure it was perfectly level. And then the next step was cutting the hole, and it says in the installation instructions exactly what size hole you want, and on this one it was 7.5 inches by 17. Now if you can see next to the door here, there's a round portion on the bottom of the camper. Now I wanted to be above that. I wanted to be on the flat part. So I leveled the camper out, and then I took a level right above that line and drew a straight line in the approximate location I thought I was going to install the furnace. And then I measured it out. If you can see, there's a cabinet wall in there, and on the other side, about 3 inches over, maybe 4 inches, there's another cabinet wall. And so I measured that out first using landmarks on the camper itself. Underneath, you can see there's that thing that joins the floor together, that aluminum piece, and I used that as a marker to figure out where it needed to go. Now this furnace is rated at like 23,500 BTU, I believe. On output, yes, 23,500 output BTUs. The original furnace that came in these was 8,000 BTUs, so this is going to be a lot warmer, or it's going to have a lot less runtime because it won't take as long to heat up. And what I did for the propane is I got some 3/8 OD line and some flare nuts and a flare tool and cutter from Harbor Freight. Now that whole toolkit right there probably cost, I think it was like $12.95 from Harbor Freight. And I got the tubing from Home Depot. It was a 10-foot roll, and it was $17, and that's about the same price as I found everywhere else. I just followed the instructions that came with the Harbor Freight tool and flared that tubing right there. Now you want to make sure you get the soft tubing, the stuff that's generally rolled up, because the stuff that's in a stick is hard pipe, and that's not what you want. And on this one I chose 3/8 OD line, that's outer diameter, because this furnace, the amount of BTUs that it uses is less than that which that line can deliver, so this will work just fine, and it's cheaper than saying buying 1/2-inch line. Okay, so here's the hole on the outside, and like I said, the first thing I did was put a level down on the bottom, because the bottom was the most important part. I drew a line, I checked my clearances to the cabinets, and everything was okay. Then I took a square and I came up on the sides and drew square lines up to the 7.5 inches I was supposed to. And I put a level across the top and drew another line, and I triple checked everything because I didn't want to mess up, and it seems to be okay. Everything lines up great. Alright, so what I did here is I had the hole cut out, and I set the door for my furnace in there. It says the camper is perfectly level, and I have stabilizer jacks all the way around so it won't move even if I walk inside. This door has to be perfectly level as well, and that was easy enough. I just threw the level on top of the edge there, and sure enough it's level. And what I did was I don't know if you can see that light's kind of making it hard for the camera, but I held it up there with my hands after I knew it was level, and I drilled a hole, and I put a nut and a screw on there to hold that side, and I threw the level on top, and I went to the other side and I did the same thing while holding it level, and I tightened those down to make sure that it was held in place. And then I went ahead and I drilled my other holes for my rivets, and I put a few more screws in there just for good measure, and I kept checking it with the level. And that's a good step to do, because you don't want it to look funny on the camper. You definitely want it level. You want the camper level, and that's what I did. So we're on the inside of the camper now, and if you could see here, this is one of the outlets for the ducting. Now on this particular furnace, it requires at least 3 of those outlets to be utilized so that the furnace can get proper flow. And to clear the round part on the bottom outside of the camper, I raised it up quite a bit higher than what would be used in a normal installation. And to make up for that, I bought these L brackets, and they're, I don't know, maybe 3 inches by 3 inches. and I took the original tabs on the furnace and bent them down so they're straight. They used to come out and then come out at an angle, so I just bent them straight. They already had holes drilled in them, and I attached them directly to those L brackets with some bolts I had laying around, and they come straight down now. And what I did was I put a level on top of the furnace to see if it was going to be level or not inside, and then if I needed to shim it up, which I did. I've got this piece of, it's like a 1x4. I put it under there, threw the level on there, came out perfect. And when I'm all done, I'm just going to screw it down, and that'll be nice and solid. And on the outside, the other edge of the furnace has these tabs that go through the door on the outside, and then they bend over, and when you screw the door on, it goes through those tabs as well, and that'll hold it on. And to seal the furnace against the door and the outside of the camper, you're supposed to use some kind of RTV sealant to do that, and you go all the way around, and then you push the furnace through the door. You push the tabs through the holes in the door for the tabs, bend them over, and then you also put that RTV over the tabs. Now back to these ducts. You can see I got one here that's going to come out the door straight this way, and I got some vents off of eBay. They were super cheap. I'm using 4-inch ducting. That's what this furnace is made for. And I'm going to mount those vents inside these doors. I'm going to have one come out this door, and I'm going to have another one run underneath the bench to my right and come out, and then I'm going to run one to the left as well, a few feet, and come out another one of the cabinet doors. And you can use like regular dryer ducting to run those vents. And what I'm doing right now is I need to know where to use my hole saw at to run the ducting through. And if you can see, I stuck a pencil on the inside of this outlet right here, and I turned it around. Now that gave me kind of a reference mark on the side of where to use the hole saw at. I did something very similar on that other side, and since this furnace is just mocked up right now, I'm able to just pull it right out, and I'll take my hole saw out of there, make the holes, I'll put the furnace back in place and make sure that the ducting is able to attach, and then I'll take the RTV to the furnace and the outside door and install both of those permanently. And I'm using rivets on this because with the Apache, the walls are just straight aluminum. They're pretty thin, and so there's nothing really to screw down to. So I'm going to use the rivets instead of sheet metal screws like the original camper had that had this furnace. Alright, so these tabs go through these holes on the door, but these holes over here don't have corresponding tabs. So I've done 3 on that side with rivets and 3 on this side with rivets. And now we're going to put the furnace in, bend those tabs over, and put rivets through those as well. Alright, so I was able to slide the furnace in, tabs are through. I just need to bend them over and rivet those in. And I was able to hook up that propane line there too, but sadly I couldn't get the silicone ring around it, so I'm going to have to do that after everything's installed. At least it's flexible, so I'll just have to push it through with a screwdriver or something and just be real careful. I think it'll work okay. So I'm going to bend these tabs over and rivet them. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the fit and finish on this. It lines up to the sides pretty well. The only part I don't like is on the bottom. You probably can't see that, but there's hinges down here for this door to fold down. And the hinges are held on by rivets, and the rivets are actually contacting the side of the camper, creating a gap. Now if I redid this, I actually would have brought the door down just a little bit to this rounded area, so that the flange would have sealed up on the flat, but then the rivets would have been more into this rounded area to provide a little bit of clearance. But when I installed it, you know, I didn't really know that. This is my first one. Now saying that, I don't recommend people installing their own propane appliances unless they have the tools and knowledge to do so. It's kind of a dangerous thing. The last thing you want to do is injure or kill somebody, you know, by carbon monoxide poisoning or having a trailer explode. And I hate to see a comment on the video saying that I just put in my own furnace, thank you, and then see him on the nightly news for being in an explosion in the campground. It's not fun and games, and I do advise that you use a qualified installer, and Atwood actually says that as well. When I got the installation manual from them, they told me explicitly to have an authorized installer put it in. But being who I am, I did it myself. Now when you install these, the installation manual is far different than an owner's manual, and odds are you're not going to find an installation manual on the internet. I had to get one straight from the manufacturer, which was a huge plus. I'm glad I had it, because when you install this, it has to be done just right so you don't get water intrusion or gas intrusion inside the camper itself. And part of my video doesn't show all the caulking that I did. And I caulked around the propane line, around all these gaskets and different weld points as per the installation manual. And so if you try to attempt something like this, definitely get the installation manual, read it 2, 3, 4 times and double check it, because you really don't want to mess around with somebody's life. If it's not you, it could be somebody else, and you don't want to have that kind of liability. Okay, so I just turned the thermostat up, so she should start up anytime. Oh, actually she just did. You can hear the fan running, and they've got a 15-second delay, so it should ignite pretty soon. You'll hear it. There we go. Flame on. So as you can see, this works. It actually works really well. There's a lot of heat coming out of those ducts. Now I follow the installation instruction manuals, so I have enough ducting. That's one thing that's very important, is if you don't have enough ducting, the static pressure will be wrong. Now on the ducting, when you do that, the ducts are incredibly high. So anything that's nearby has to have a certain amount of clearance. On this furnace, it was a 1/4 inch for anything within 3 feet, I believe. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're running the ducting as well. This camper is pretty small, so our ducts aren't that long. So I'm not worried about the static pressure on this one. But it's something to keep in mind is static pressure, because that's part of the installation. And if you can't do a static pressure test, you should definitely take it to a qualified installer that can. Another thing is the gas line test. You don't want your gas lines leaking, and if you install them yourself, you definitely want to have those checked to make sure there's no gas leaking out, because that would be a horrible thing. And another thing is the intake air. Now this is consuming a lot of air, and it needs quite a bit of air to run, and to run correctly. If it runs incorrectly, then it'll put off different noxious gases like carbon monoxide or oxides of nitrogen, depending on what it is. So you definitely want to follow your installation manual and do it right. Okay, here it is on the inside. I haven't run the ducting yet, but you can see I've got the holes, and she's fastened down pretty good. It's still running, but I'm trying to wiggle it right now, and this thing's rock solid. I got barely any movement, and I'm putting a lot of weight on it, so it should be safe going down the road. That's something important, is you want this thing anchored down really well. And I might actually put one more bracket that extends from the cabinet over to the cupboard wall over there, and that's very important. You definitely don't want anything vibrating around and messing with your propane fittings or jiggling wires, because you don't want any of that stuff to be damaged. And if you can see, there's you probably can't see actually, there's caulking all the way around this. When they had me, as part of the installation, the caulking needed to meet the camper wall to the outside bezel for the door, and it also needed to touch to the cabinet of the heater itself. And I went through and I made sure all that was sealed correctly, and we leak checked it with pressurized air and soapy water, and everything looks great. And that's something you really need to follow in your installation manual, is where all that stuff needs to be caulked. I can't emphasize that enough. And the clearances as well. You definitely want to have enough clearance. You don't want to set your camper on fire, and definitely be mindful of that. And as I said before, I actually suggest getting a qualified installer to install these for you. Now, as you can see, I got some finished work to do. I still need to change the wiring around a little bit and run my ducting, but overall I'm very happy with the installation, and I hope this video helps you guys out. And if you like it, please hit like and subscribe. Thank you.